The generator sat in the corner of the warehouse like a tombstone, its rusted casing catching the harsh, fluorescent light. Maya Donovan pressed her palm against the cold metal, feeling the stillness beneath her fingers where vibration should have been. Behind her she heard Richard Harlow's expensive shoes clicking against the concrete floor. "That thing's been dead for 3 years," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Costs more to fix it than replace it, but hey, if you can get it running before I finish my coffee, I'll sign your contract right here, right now." Maya didn't turn around. She was 42 years old, and she'd heard every variation of this joke for the past 23 years. The warehouse was cold, somewhere outside Pittsburgh, in a neighborhood where steel mills used to breathe smoke into the sky. Now, it was just empty buildings and men like Harlow, who flew in from New York to decide which struggling businesses deserved to survive. Her business, her father's business, the one she'd been trying to keep alive for the past 4 years, since the stroke that left him unable to speak clearly, unable to work with his hands the way he'd taught her to work with hers. "Is that a real offer?" she asked, still not looking at him. "Sure." His tone was light, dismissive. "Why not? I've got 15 minutes before my next meeting. Consider it entertainment." Maya's toolbox sat by the warehouse entrance, 30 feet away. She'd brought it from the van out of habit, the way her father had taught her. Never walk into any building without your tools, even if you're just there to talk. The contract papers were in her other hand, already crumpled from how tightly she'd been holding them during Harlow's hour-long explanation of why he couldn't possibly invest in a legacy repair business in the current economic climate. No, she set the papers down on a nearby crate. Then she walked to her toolbox, knelt and opened it. The tools inside were older than she was. Her father's tools, before they became hers. Wrenches with tape-wrapped handles, screwdrivers worn smooth at the grips, a voltage tester that still worked perfectly, despite its cracked plastic casing. "You're serious," Harlow said. And now there was something else in his voice. Not quite laughter, not quite curiosity, something in between. "Dead generators don't exist," Maya said, selecting a screwdriver and a wrench. "Just generators nobody's tried hard enough to fix." She heard him chuckle, heard him settle against something, probably the desk where she'd spread out her business plan an hour ago. All the projections and client lists and testimonials that hadn't meant anything to him. She heard him pull out his phone, probably to check his email while he waited for her to fail. Maya approached the generator like she'd approach a patient in an emergency room. That's how her father had taught her to think about broken machines, as living things that needed diagnosis before treatment. She ran her hand along the frame, checking for obvious damage. The casing was intact, no visible cracks. The fuel line connections seemed solid, though she'd need to test them properly. The control panel was another story. Someone had tried to hotwire it, probably years ago, and had given up halfway through. Exposed wires, melted insulation, corrosion on the contacts. She could see why they'd called it dead. "The previous owner was a manufacturing outfit," Harlow said from behind her. "Went under in 2019. Everything here's been sitting since then." Maya didn't answer. She was already removing the access panel, her hands moving with the automatic precision that came from decades of repetition. Inside, the engine looked better than she'd expected. No major rust, no seized components that she could see. The fuel system would need flushing, obviously. The electrical system needed rewiring. The starter motor... She tested the starter motor manually, using her wrench to turn the flywheel. It moved. Stiff, resistant, but it moved. "Huh," she said softly. "What?" "It's not dead. It's just been forgotten." She heard him shift position, heard his footsteps coming closer. "There's a difference?" "There's always a difference." Maya worked quickly, systematically. She bypassed the corroded wiring, creating a temporary circuit using wire from her toolbox. She checked the fuel line, found it gummy with old diesel, and cleared it as best she could without proper equipment. The fuel filter was clogged, but she'd expected that. She removed it entirely, knowing the engine could run without it long enough to prove her point. The battery was dead, of course, but the warehouse had power, and she had jumper cables in her van. She looked up at Harlow for the first time since she'd started working. "I need to get something from outside." He checked his watch. "You've got 7 minutes left. Then I'll need you to help me." That surprised him. She could see it in his face, a man who'd probably never been asked to help with manual labor in his entire professional life. But he followed her outside to the van, and he carried one end of the jumper cables back to the warehouse while she carried the other. The morning air was sharp, with early March cold. The kind of cold that settled into Pittsburgh and didn't leave until May. Maya's breath clouded in front of her as she worked, connecting the cables to the generator's battery terminals, then to the building's electrical panel. Harlow stood nearby, holding his coffee cup like a talisman. "My dad built this business in 1987, Maya said as she worked. She didn't know why she was telling him this. Maybe because she needed to fill the silence. Maybe because, if this didn't work, she wanted him to understand what he was walking away from. Started with nothing but a truck and a toolbox. By the time I was 10, we had 6 employees. By the time I was 20, we had 15. What happened? Harlow asked. 2008 happened, then 2020, then my dad had a stroke. Now it's just me and 2 guys who've been with us for 20 years. She finished connecting the cables and stood up, her knees protesting. "We're good at what we do. We're just not good at being what investors want us to be." Which is what? Tech companies, apps, scalable solutions. She walked to the generator's control panel, her hand hovering over the starter button. Nobody wants to invest in someone who fixes things that break. They want to invest in things that never break in the first place. That's not quite fair, isn't it? She pressed the starter button. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the generator coughed, a deep grinding sound that echoed through the warehouse. It coughed again, and then it caught, and the engine roared to life, loud and rough and unmistakably alive. The overhead lights in the warehouse flickered and brightened. The generator settled into an uneven but steady rhythm, diesel smoke puffing from its exhaust. Maya stood there, her hand still on the control panel, feeling the vibration through the metal casing. She'd done it. In 14 minutes, with borrowed power and improvised wiring, she'd brought a dead generator back to life. Behind her, Harlow was completely silent. Maya turned around. He was staring at the generator, then at her, then back at the generator. His coffee cup hung forgotten in his hand. He looked like a man who'd just watched something impossible happen in front of him. "The wiring's temporary," Maya said over the engine noise. "The fuel system needs a complete overhaul. The whole thing needs a proper service. But it works. It'll keep working long enough for you to finish your coffee and sign that contract." Harlow set his coffee cup down on the crate next to her business plan. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He laughed, not the dismissive laugh from before, but something real and surprised. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. "I'm the person who keeps things running when everyone else gives up on them," Maya said. "That's what my business does. That's what I'm asking you to invest in." He picked up the contract papers, smoothing them out where she'd crumpled them. "This says you need 200,000 for equipment updates and hiring." "That's right. What if I said I'd give you half that amount?" Maya felt something cold settle in her chest. Half wouldn't be enough. Half would let them limp along for another year, maybe 2, but it wouldn't solve the fundamental problem. They needed new diagnostic equipment. They needed a better vehicle. They needed to be able to hire specialists for the increasingly complex systems in modern industrial equipment. "Then I'd say thank you," she said, "and I'd spend the next 6 months looking for someone to give me the other half." Harlow studied her for a long moment. The generator continued its rough idle behind them, filling the warehouse with noise and diesel exhaust. Finally, he pulled a pen from his jacket pocket. "I'm going to give you the full amount," he said, clicking the pen open. "But I want monthly reports. I want to see how you're spending it. And I want you to bring on a business consultant to help with operations efficiency." A consultant? Maya kept her voice flat. "Someone who understands modern business practices, marketing, client acquisition systems, all the things you clearly don't give a damn about." He smiled, but it wasn't entirely unkind. "You're brilliant with machines, that's obvious. But you're terrible at selling yourself. That needs to change." He was right, and they both knew it. Maya had spent the last 4 years keeping her head down, doing the work, hoping that quality would speak for itself. It hadn't. Word of mouth only went so far. Meanwhile, newer companies with flashier websites and better marketing were taking clients she should have had. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I'll work with a consultant. I'll send you monthly reports. I'll do whatever you need me to do." She met his eyes. "As long as the work stays good. As long as we don't compromise on quality. I wouldn't expect you to." Harlow signed the contract with quick, decisive strokes. Then he handed it to her. "Welcome to the portfolio, Ms. Donovan. Try not to make me regret this." Maya took the contract, still warm from where his hand had been holding it. The generator rattled behind her. Imperfect but functional, alive despite everyone's assumption that it was beyond saving. Just like her business. Just like her. She should have felt relieved, triumphant. Instead, all she felt was the weight of what came next. The reality of having someone watching over her shoulder, judging her decisions, expecting her to transform into something she'd never been. "My flight's in 2 hours, Harlow said, picking up his coffee. "I'll have my lawyers send over the investment documents next week. In the meantime, I'll have my assistant put you in touch with a consultant named Marcus Webb, former operations director at a Fortune 500. Good guy, practical, you'll like him." "Sure," Maya said, because what else could she say? After Harlow left, Maya stood alone in the warehouse with the running generator. She should turn it off, disconnect her cables, pack up her tools. Instead, she pulled out her phone and called her father. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice thick and difficult to understand. "Maya?" "I got it, Dad," she said. "The investment, the full amount." There was silence on the other end, then a sound that might have been a sob or might have been laughter. Good. Proud. So proud. "I know, Dad. Your mother would—" He stopped, struggling with the words. "I know," Maya said again, softer this time. After she hung up, she finally shut down the generator. The silence that followed felt enormous, pressing in on her from all sides. She gathered her tools slowly, methodically, the way her father had taught her. Every tool in its place. Every cable coiled properly. Everything ready for the next job. Outside, the March wind cut through her jacket as she loaded the toolbox into her van. Pittsburgh spread out around her. All grey skies and old brick buildings. A city that had survived the death of steel and was slowly, painfully, learning to be something new. Maya climbed into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment. Engine running, heat slowly building. The contract sat on the passenger seat beside her, signed and official. She'd won. She'd gotten what she came for. So why did it feel like she'd just agreed to something that would cost her more than money could measure? Marcus Webb arrived on a Tuesday morning in mid-March, driving a Tesla and wearing clothes that probably cost more than Maya's monthly truck payment. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of effortless confidence that came from never having to prove himself with his hands. He found her under an industrial refrigeration unit in the back of a restaurant supply warehouse, troubleshooting a compressor that kept tripping the circuit breaker. Her 2 employees, Tommy and Carlos, were handling another job across town. She was alone when she heard expensive shoes clicking on concrete for the 2nd time in 2 weeks. "Maya Donovan." His voice was smooth, educated, nothing like the rough Pittsburgh accents she'd grown up around. "Under here," she called back. "Give me a minute. Take your time." She finished checking the pressure readings, made a note on her tablet, and rolled out from under the unit. Marcus Webb stood there with a messenger bag over one shoulder and an expression that was trying very hard to look impressed, but couldn't quite hide the doubt underneath. "You're younger than I expected," he said, offering his hand. Maya stood up, wiping her palms on her coveralls before shaking his hand. "You mean you expected my dad?" "Richard Harlow mentioned the business had been in your family for decades. I assumed you assumed wrong." She picked up her tablet. "Let's talk outside. It's quieter." They walked through the warehouse to the loading dock, where Maya's van sat parked in weak March sunlight. She'd been up since 5 that morning, had already completed 2 service calls, and had 3 more scheduled for the afternoon. Marcus pulled a laptop from his bag like he was preparing for a presentation. "I've reviewed your business records from the past 5 years, he said. "Your client retention rate is exceptional, 93%. Most service businesses struggle to maintain 80. People come back when you do the work right. Agreed, but your client acquisition rate is concerning. You've only added 12 new clients in the past 2 years, and you've lost 8. "Net positive 4, Maya said. "That's growth. That's stagnation." Marcus opened his laptop, angling it so she could see the screen. "Look at your market. Pittsburgh alone has over 3,000 businesses that need industrial equipment maintenance. You're capturing less than 2% of that market. Quality over quantity. That's not a business strategy. That's a slogan." He pulled up another document. Projections, graphs, numbers that Maya didn't want to look at because she already knew what they meant. "At your current rate, you'll be profitable barely for the next 3 years. Then equipment costs will exceed revenue growth and you'll start declining. In 5 years, you'll be back where you started, struggling to keep the doors open." Maya leaned against her van, feeling the cold metal through her coveralls. "So what do you want me to do? Start cutting corners? Take on more jobs than we can handle well? That's how businesses fail." "That's how businesses without proper systems fail," Marcus corrected. "Businesses with good systems scale up while maintaining quality. That's what Harlow hired me to help you build. I don't need systems. I need time to do the work." "No." Marcus closed his laptop, and for the first time, his smooth confidence cracked slightly. "You need to stop being the bottleneck in your own business. You need to delegate. You need to train others to do what you do. You need to step back from being a technician and start being a business owner." The words hit Maya like cold water. She wanted to argue with him, wanted to explain that she couldn't just teach someone else to diagnose a failing hydraulic system by the sound it made. Couldn't just hand off the instinct that told her when a motor was about to seize before any gauge showed a problem. Those weren't things you learned from a manual. They were things you learned from 20 years of making mistakes and fixing them. But she'd signed the contract. She'd taken Harlow's money. She'd agreed to this. "Fine," she said. "What's the first step?" Marcus smiled, and it was a genuine smile, not the practice consultant smile from before. "The first step is you go home at a reasonable hour today. 6 o'clock, not 8, not 10, 6. I have 3 more calls. Send Tommy or Carlos, or reschedule them. One afternoon won't destroy your business, but working yourself into exhaustion will." He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to her. "We're meeting tomorrow morning at 8 at that diner on Penn Avenue, the one with the good coffee. We're going to map out your actual schedule versus your ideal schedule, and then we're going to figure out how to close that gap." "I don't have time for long meetings." "Maya." He said her name gently, like he was talking to someone who'd been running so long she'd forgotten how to stop. That's exactly the problem. You don't have time for anything except work. When did you last take a day off? She couldn't remember, literally couldn't remember. Christmas, maybe? But she'd still checked her phone every hour, still returned 2 calls from clients with emergencies. That's what I thought, Marcus said. See you tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Don't be late. He walked back to his Tesla, and Maya stood there in the loading dock, feeling something uncomfortable twist in her chest. He was right. She knew he was right. But knowing it and accepting it were different things. That evening, Maya did something she hadn't done in months. She went home at 6:30. Her apartment was in Bloomfield, on the 2nd floor of a narrow brick building that probably dated back to the 1920s. 1 bedroom, barely enough room for her tools and equipment in the corner, she'd converted into a workshop. She'd lived here for 8 years, and she still had boxes she'd never unpacked, stacked against one wall. She ordered pizza from the place down the street, then sat at her small kitchen table with her laptop, pulling up her business records. Not the sanitized version she'd shown Harlow, but the real numbers, the ones that kept her awake at night. Tommy and Carlos were both in their 50s, both skilled, both loyal, but they couldn't do everything Maya could do. When a call came in for complex diagnostics or unfamiliar systems, she had to take it personally. That meant she was averaging 65 hours a week, sometimes 70, while Tommy and Carlos worked standard 40-hour weeks. The investment from Harlow would let her buy better equipment, maybe hire another person. But that didn't solve the fundamental problem. She was the business. Everything ran through her, every decision, every complex repair, every client relationship. Her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, assuming it was a client, but the caller ID showed her brother's name. "Hey, Jake. Hey, Dad said you got the investment." Jake's voice was careful, neutral. "Congratulations." "Thanks. He also said you're working with a consultant now. Some business guy from New York. Boston, actually, and yeah." Maya pinched the bridge of her nose, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. Harlow's condition for the investment. "And how's that going?" "He wants me to work less." Jake laughed, short and sharp. "Good luck with that. You've been working non-stop since you were 19. Someone had to. The silence that followed was heavy with old arguments, old resentments. Jake had left Pittsburgh 8 years ago, moved to Denver, started his own life away from the family business and all its complications. Maya had stayed. When their mother died, Maya had stayed. When their father had the stroke, Maya had stayed. When the business started failing, Maya had stayed. Jake had sent money, had called regularly, had offered to come back and help, but they both knew he wouldn't. Couldn't. He'd built a life away from all of this, and coming back would mean abandoning it. "How is Dad?" Jake asked finally. "Better. His speech is clearer. He's doing physical therapy 3 times a week, but he's not coming back to work, Jake. You know that, right?" "I know. So it's just me. It's been just me for 4 years now, and I'm—" She stopped, surprised by the sudden thickness in her throat. "I'm tired, Jake. I'm really tired." "Then maybe this consultant guy is right. Maybe you need to let other people carry some of the weight." "I don't know how to do that." "Then learn." Jake's voice was gentle but firm. "You spent your whole life learning how to fix machines. Learn how to fix your business. Learn how to fix your life." After they hung up, Maya sat at her kitchen table until the pizza got cold. Then she heated it up in the microwave, ate 3 slices standing at the counter, and went to bed at 9:30, the earliest she'd gone to bed on a weeknight in years. She lay awake in the dark, listening to the sounds of Bloomfield outside her window. Traffic on Liberty Avenue, someone's dog barking, the distant wail of a siren. This city had been her whole world for 42 years. Sometimes she wondered what it would feel like to leave, to start over somewhere else, to be someone other than Joseph Donovan's daughter, the woman who could fix anything. But she'd never leave. She knew that with the same certainty, she knew how to diagnose a failing bearing by its sound. Pittsburgh was in her bones, in her hands, in every skill her father had taught her. The question was whether she could stay without destroying herself in the process. The next morning, Maya arrived at the diner at 7:45. Marcus was already there, sitting in a booth by the window with coffee and a notebook. He smiled when he saw her. "You're early." "Old habit." She slid into the booth across from him. "My dad always said if you're on time, you're late." "Smart man." Marcus pushed a menu toward her. "Order breakfast. We're going to be here a while." They spent the next 3 hours mapping out Maya's actual schedule versus what Marcus called her theoretical capacity. It was brutal, seeing it laid out in black and white. She was working 67 hours a week on average, taking emergency calls at all hours, skipping meals, sacrificing sleep. And for what? To maintain a business that was barely growing, barely surviving. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said, pulling out a different notebook. "We're going to implement a tiered system, routine maintenance and simple repairs. Tommy and Carlos handle completely. Mid-level diagnostics and repairs, they handle with you available for consultation. Complex systems and new clients, you handle personally. Everything else gets scheduled, no exceptions. What about emergencies?" Define emergency. Maya thought about it. Equipment failure that stops production, safety hazards, time-sensitive situations where delay would cost the client more than our emergency rate. "Fine, those are emergencies. Everything else waits until regular business hours." Marcus made notes in his notebook. "We're also implementing a scheduling system. Clients book appointments online or through your dispatcher, who we're going to hire next week, instead of calling you directly." "I can't afford a dispatcher." "You can't afford not to have one. You're losing billable hours every day, answering calls and scheduling appointments. That's a $15 an hour task you're doing at a $100 an hour rate." The math was simple, obvious. Maya had known it for years, but had never been able to bring herself to add another salary to the payroll, not when money was tight and every dollar mattered. "There's something else," Marcus said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I need you to start training Tommy and Carlos to handle more complex work, not immediately, but gradually. You need to create a succession plan." "Succession?" Maya's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. "I'm 42, not 70. And if you get sick, if you have an accident, if you just burn out and can't do this anymore." Marcus met her eyes. "Right now, if you disappear, the business collapses. That's not sustainable. That's not even responsible." He was right. God, he was right. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. Not that she needed to change, but that she'd known she needed to change for years and had refused to admit it. "Okay," Maya said quietly. "Okay, let's do it. All of it." Marcus smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Good, because Richard Harlow's betting a lot of money on you, and between you and me, I think he's right." The changes happened fast. Too fast, Maya sometimes thought, like watching a train accelerate down a track you couldn't leave. By the end of March, they'd hired a dispatcher named Rachel, a sharp woman in her late 20s who'd grown up in McKeesport and understood the industrial landscape of Pittsburgh without needing explanation. She fielded calls, scheduled appointments, and managed the client database with efficiency that made Maya feel both grateful and slightly obsolete. In April, Marcus convinced Maya to invest in new diagnostic equipment, thermal imaging cameras, advanced multimeters, a borescope system that could inspect internal components without disassembly. The tools transformed what Tommy and Carlos could handle independently, pushing routine jobs from 70% to nearly 85%. By May, Maya was working 50 hours a week instead of 67. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt like she was losing control. "You're fighting the system," Marcus said one afternoon in mid-May. They were in her shop, a renovated garage in Lawrenceville that she'd been leasing for 6 years, and he'd come by to review the first quarter results since the investment. "The numbers are good. Client satisfaction is still over 90%. Revenue is up 12%. So why do you look like someone died?" Maya was calibrating a pressure gauge, her hands moving with automatic precision. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're micromanaging Tommy and Carlos. Rachel says you're double-checking every appointment she schedules. You're still taking calls at 9 at night even though we specifically set boundaries." Marcus pulled up a chair, sitting backward on it like he was settling in for a long conversation. "What's really going on?" Maya set down the gauge, harder than she meant to. "What's going on is that I spent 23 years building this business into something that works, and now you're here changing everything and expecting me to just—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "To just let go. That's exactly what I'm expecting you to do." "Well, I can't." The words came out sharp, defensive. "This is my father's business. It's his name on the sign, his reputation. When I took over 4 years ago, people looked at me like I was going to run it into the ground. They said I was too young, too inexperienced, that I should sell while the name still meant something. I proved them wrong. I kept it alive. And now you want me to hand over control to systems and schedules and people who weren't there when—" She stopped. Marcus was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "When what?" he asked gently. "When it mattered." The silence that followed felt heavy, pressing down on Maya's chest. She turned away, pretending to organize tools that were already organized. Anything to avoid Marcus's steady gaze. "My mother died when I was 24, she said finally. "Car accident, black ice on the Parkway East. My dad he was destroyed. For 6 months, he barely functioned. The business should have collapsed. Would have collapsed if I hadn't—" She stopped again, her hands stilling on a wrench. "I learned how to do everything. The repairs, the client calls, the bookkeeping, everything. Because someone had to, and then later, after Dad's stroke, it happened again. Everyone expected me to fail, to sell, to give up. But I didn't. And now you can't stop," Marcus said quietly. Maya turned to face him. "Can't or won't? Does it matter?" Outside, she heard Tommy's truck pulling into the lot, heard Carlos laughing at something. They'd been with the business for 20 years, had worked under her father before working under her. They were good men, skilled technicians, completely reliable, but they weren't her. They didn't carry the weight of Joseph Donovan's reputation on their shoulders. They didn't wake up at 3 in the morning worrying about whether the business would still exist in 5 years. "My dad called yesterday," Maya said. "He wanted to know when he could come by the shop, see the new equipment, maybe help out with simple tasks. His physical therapist says it would be good for him, good for his recovery." "That's great." "Is it?" Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it, because all I could think was that if he comes here, he'll see how much things have changed. He'll see the new systems, the new equipment, the way we're doing things differently, and she swallowed hard. "He'll see that I changed his business into something he might not recognize." Marcus stood up, walked over to where Maya was standing. "Can I tell you something? Something I learned working with dozens of businesses like yours?" "Sure." "The worst thing you can do to honor your father's legacy is to keep his business frozen in time. Businesses that don't adapt die, always. The fact that you're changing things, that's not betrayal, that's survival, that's respect for the work he put in to build something worth saving." Maya wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But there was a voice in her head, had been there for years, maybe since her mother died, that said the only way to prove herself was to do everything alone, to never ask for help, to carry the weight until it crushed her, because that was what being strong meant. Her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Rachel. "Hey, what's up?" Maya, I have a client on the line, Riverside Manufacturing. Their main compressor is down. They're saying it's an emergency, full production stop. This was the test, the moment Marcus had been preparing her for. Riverside was a long-time client, important but not critical. Tommy and Carlos were both available, both capable of handling compressor work. The old Maya would have dropped everything, raced over there herself, taken control of the situation. "Send Tommy!" Maya said, and the words felt like pulling teeth. "He handled their last compressor service. He knows their system. Have him call me if he needs consultation." "You sure?" "I'm sure. He can do this." She hung up. Marcus was smiling. "What?" Maya asked. "Nothing. That's just the first time I've seen you actually let go of something important." 20 minutes later, Tommy called. There was tension in his voice that made Maya's stomach clench. "Maya, we've got a problem. The compressor's a newer model than what I'm used to. The diagnostic codes aren't making sense, and I don't want to make it worse." The old Maya would have been in the van already, driving toward Riverside, taking over the job because clearly no one else could handle it. But she'd been working with Tommy for 4 years, had seen him diagnose hundreds of systems successfully. If he was confused, it wasn't because he lacked skill. It was because he needed information. "Describe what you're seeing," Maya said. Tommy walked her through the diagnostic codes, the error patterns, the behavior of the compressor when he attempted to start it. Maya closed her eyes, visualizing the system in her head, running through possible causes. "It's a pressure sensor fault," she said finally. "The codes are misleading because the sensor's feeding bad data to the control system. Check the sensor on the main accumulator tank. My bet is the connection is corroded." "Yeah?" Tommy's voice brightened. "Okay, let me check. Hold on." Maya heard him moving, heard metal on metal, heard his grunt of satisfaction. "You're right. Corrosion all over the connection. I can clean this up. No problem." "Good. Call me back when it's running." After she hung up, she realized her hands were shaking slightly. Marcus was still watching her. "That was hard for you," he said. "Yeah, but you did it anyway." "Yeah." That's the difference between a technician and a business owner. A technician needs to fix everything themselves. A business owner needs to help others fix things. Marcus picked up his messenger bag. "I'm going to head out, but Maya, what you just did, that's the future of your business. That's how you scale without sacrificing quality. You become the knowledge base, the consultant, the mentor. You don't become the person who does everything." After Marcus left, Maya sat alone in her shop, listening to the sounds of Lawrenceville outside, traffic, voices, the industrial hum of the city. The new diagnostic equipment sat on the workbench, still partially in its boxes. The business plan Marcus had created was pinned to the wall, full of projections and goals and timelines. Her father's old tools hung on the pegboard above the workbench, exactly where she'd placed them 4 years ago. Some she still used daily. Others were obsolete now, replaced by better technology. But she couldn't bring herself to put them away, to admit that the era they represented was over. Her phone rang again. Rachel. "Tommy called. Riverside's compressor is running. Client's happy." Tommy sounded pretty pleased with himself too. "Good," Maya said, and meant it. "That's really good." That night, Maya drove to her father's place in Squirrel Hill, a small house he'd bought in the 1980s with money from the business. Jake had wanted to sell it after the stroke, move Dad into assisted living. Maya had refused. She'd hired a home care nurse, handled all the logistics, made sure their father could stay in the house where he'd lived with their mother, where he'd taught Maya everything about tools and engines and fixing broken things. Joseph Donovan sat in his favorite chair by the window, physical therapy equipment stacked in the corner. He looked older than 67, worn down by the stroke and 4 years of slow recovery. But his eyes were sharp when Maya walked in, still the same eyes that had watched her take apart her first engine at age 12. Hey, sweetheart, he said, the words coming slowly but clearly. Didn't expect you tonight. I wanted to talk to you about something. She sat down across from him, trying to find the right words. How do you tell your father that you're transforming the business he built, that you're changing systems he created, that you're becoming something different than what he taught you to be? The business is doing well, she said finally. The investment is working out. We hired a dispatcher, got new equipment. Tommy and Carlos are taking on more responsibility. Her father watched her, waiting. I'm scared, Dad, Maya said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I'm scared that I'm changing everything you built, that I'm losing what made this business special, that I'm... Her voice cracked. That I'm failing you. Joseph Donovan was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out with his good hand, took Maya's hand in his. Not failing, he said, each word deliberate. Growing. That's what you're supposed to do. Take what I built and make it better, make it yours. But what if I change it too much? What if it stops being your legacy? It was never my legacy. He squeezed her hand, his grip still strong despite everything. It was always yours, from the moment you first picked up a wrench. Always yours. Maya felt tears building behind her eyes, threatening to spill over. She'd cried when her mother died. She'd cried when her father had the stroke, but she hadn't cried about the business, not once, because crying meant admitting weakness, and she couldn't afford to be weak. I'm so tired, Dad, she whispered. I know. I don't know how to stop. Then learn. You learned everything else. Learn this too. They sat together in the gathering darkness, her hand in his, while outside the window Pittsburgh settled into its evening rhythms. Somewhere in the city there were machines breaking down, systems failing, people who needed help. But for right now, in this moment, Maya let herself stop, let herself breathe, let herself be just a daughter, talking to her father, instead of the woman who had to fix everything. When she finally left, driving back through streets she'd known her whole life, Maya felt something shift inside her. Not relief exactly, not peace, but something like acceptance. The recognition that she couldn't carry everything alone anymore, that letting others help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. How'd it go with your dad? She'd mentioned she was going to visit him, had mentioned she was struggling with the changes. Marcus had listened without judgment, without trying to fix it, just acknowledged that change was hard, even when it was necessary. Good, she texted back. Really good. See you tomorrow. Tomorrow, she'd keep building the business into something sustainable. Tomorrow, she'd keep learning to let go. Tomorrow, she'd keep proving that growth and legacy could coexist. But tonight, she just drove through Pittsburgh, windows down, letting the May air wash over her, and allowed herself to imagine a future where she didn't have to carry the world alone. August brought heat to Pittsburgh, the kind that settled over the city like a heavy blanket and didn't lift until September. Maya stood in her renovated shop, twice the size now, with proper ventilation and workspace for 4 technicians instead of 2, watching her newest hire work through a diagnostic procedure. Her name was Sarah Chen, 26 years old, fresh out of a technical program at Community College of Allegheny County. She'd never worked in industrial maintenance before, but she had steady hands, a quick mind, and most importantly, she asked questions instead of pretending she knew everything. The pressure reading's inconsistent, Sarah said, frowning at the gauge. That usually means a leak, right? Usually, Maya agreed. But what else could cause it? Sarah thought for a moment. Faulty gauge, or maybe the sensor's dirty. Good. Always check the simple stuff first. How would you test the gauge? Compare it to a known good gauge, same system. Go do that." Maya watched Sarah carefully remove the gauge and head to the calibration station, her movements precise and methodical. 5 months ago, hiring someone this inexperienced would have seemed impossible. Now, with systems in place, with Tommy and Carlos capable of handling advanced work independently, Maya had the capacity to train someone new. It still felt strange sometimes, but it also felt right. "She's good," Marcus said from behind her. He'd stopped by once a week since May, checking progress, offering guidance, slowly transitioning from active consultant to occasional advisor. "Quick learner." "Yeah." Maya turned to face him. "You were right, by the way, about everything, the systems, the training, the delegation. It's working." "Of course I was right. I'm very expensive." Marcus smiled. "But you're the one who did the hard part. You're the one who changed." The numbers proved it. Revenue was up 28% since March. Client base had expanded by 18 new accounts. Maya was working 45 hours a week, sometimes 40, and the business was running better than it ever had when she worked 70. More importantly, she was sleeping through the night, eating regular meals. She'd even gone to a Pirates game with some old friends last week, something she hadn't done in years. "Richard Harlow wants to schedule a call next week," Marcus said. 6-month check-in. "I've prepared a report on your progress, but he'll want to hear from you directly." "What's he going to ask?" "Probably about your expansion plans. You're ahead of projections, which means you have capital to invest. The question is what you do with it." Maya had been thinking about that for weeks now. The obvious answer was to hire another technician, maybe 2, expand their service area beyond Pittsburgh into the surrounding counties, take on commercial contracts they'd had to turn down in the past. But there was another possibility, one that scared and excited her in equal measure. "What if we started training other technicians?" she said. "Not just hiring them, but actually training them from scratch. Create a program. Maybe partner with the community college. Give people a path into skilled trades who might not have one otherwise." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "That's ambitious. Too ambitious." "No." He pulled out his phone, making notes. "Actually, it's brilliant. There's a massive shortage of skilled technicians in this region. If you can create a pipeline of trained workers, you're not just building your business, you're solving a market problem. That's exactly the kind of thing investors love." "I'm not looking for more investors." "Maybe not now, but in 2 years? 3? If you build a training program that works, you could franchise the model, license it to other maintenance businesses, turn your expertise into a scalable product." Marcus looked up from his phone. "You could change the entire industry, Maya." The idea was dizzying. 6 months ago, she'd been struggling to keep one small business alive. Now Marcus was talking about industry transformation, franchising, scaling nationally. It felt like too much, too fast, but it also felt possible in a way nothing had felt possible before. "Let me think about it," Maya said. "Take your time, but not too much time. Good ideas don't wait forever." After Marcus left, Maya spent the afternoon working alongside Sarah, teaching her the subtle art of hydraulic system diagnosis. It reminded her of learning from her father. The way he'd never just given her answers, always made her think through problems, taught her to trust her instincts while respecting the limits of her knowledge. Around 4 o'clock, Tommy stuck his head into the shop. "Maya, your dad's here." She looked up, surprised. "What?" "Yeah, he's out front. Came in a taxi." Maya found her father standing in the main garage, leaning on his cane, looking around with wide eyes. He was dressed carefully, button-down shirt, clean jeans, the kind of effort that meant this visit mattered to him. His physical therapist had been working with him on walking longer distances, rebuilding strength and balance. Coming here on his own was a statement. "Dad!" Maya hurried over. "What are you doing here? You should have called. I would have picked you up." "Wanted to see the new place," he said, his speech clearer than it had been months ago. "Wanted to see what you've built." She gave him a tour slowly, letting him set the pace. Showed him the new diagnostic equipment, the expanded workspace, the organized tool systems. Introduced him to Sarah, who shook his hand with respect and told him his daughter was an excellent teacher. Showed him the schedule board where Rachel tracked all their jobs, the systematic efficiency that had replaced chaos. Joseph Donovan took it all in quietly, his expression unreadable. Maya felt her stomach tighten with old anxiety. What did he think? Did he see improvement, or did he see his legacy being dismantled? Finally, they sat in her small office, really just a partitioned corner with a desk and a computer, and her father looked at her with those sharp eyes that still missed nothing. "Proud of you," he said simply. "Yeah? This is better than what I did. Smarter. You took what I taught you and made it better." He reached out, touched the edge of her desk. "Your mother would have loved this. Seeing you build something that lasts." Maya felt her throat tighten. "I was so scared of changing things, of losing what made the business special. What made it special was always the work, the quality, the reputation. You didn't lose that. You made it stronger." He smiled, and it was her father's real smile, the one from before the stroke. "And you're taking care of yourself. That's what I wanted most, not the business, you." They sat together in comfortable silence. Outside, Tommy was working on a commercial refrigeration unit. Carlos was teaching Sarah how to properly torque bolt connections. Rachel was on the phone with a new client, her voice professional and confident. The business ran without Maya, having to control every moment of it. It was exactly what she'd been afraid of, and exactly what she'd needed. That evening, Maya drove her father home, then stopped at a bar in Lawrenceville where she'd arranged to meet some college friends. Actual social plans, scheduled days in advance, something that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Her friend Jessica was already there, along with two others Maya hadn't seen in months. They hugged her, ordered a round of drinks, and settled into easy conversation. They talked about movies, about local politics, about Jessica's kids and someone's new house and the Pirates' terrible season. Nobody asked about the business. Nobody treated Maya like she was about to collapse under pressure. They just talked to her like a person, like a friend, like someone who had a life beyond work. It felt foreign and wonderful. "You look different," Jessica said at one point. "Lighter, somehow." "I'm working less." "You're happy," Jessica corrected. "That's what's different. You're actually happy." Maya thought about that on the drive home. Was she happy? It felt like a strange question. She'd spent so long focused on survival, on proving herself, on carrying weight, that she'd forgotten to even consider happiness as a goal. But maybe Jessica was right. Maybe that's what this feeling was. Not relief, not satisfaction, but actual happiness. The sense that her life was hers again, that she had space to breathe, to grow, to be something more than just her work. The next week, Maya had her 6-month check-in call with Richard Harlow. She'd been nervous about it, had prepared talking points and pulled reports, but when she saw his face on the video call, he was smiling. "Maya Donovan," he said, "you're making me look very smart. Good numbers? Excellent numbers. But more than that, Marcus tells me you're building something sustainable. A business that can grow without destroying you in the process. That's rare. Most entrepreneurs I work with fight that until they burn out completely." "I almost did," Maya admitted. "But I had good people forcing me to change." "That's the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, your training program idea. Marcus sent me the preliminary proposal. I think it's brilliant." They talked for 40 minutes about possibilities, about logistics, about capital requirements and timelines. Harlow offered additional investment if Maya could create a viable pilot program by next spring. He connected her with contacts at the community college, at other investment firms, at regional manufacturers who might partner on training initiatives. By the end of the call, Maya's head was spinning with possibilities. "One more thing," Harlow said before they hung up. "I've been telling people about what you did. That generator trick back in February, best investment pitch I've ever seen. Several colleagues have asked about you. If you're interested in consulting work, teaching other businesses how to implement your kind of systematic quality improvement, I can make introductions." "Consulting?" Maya laughed. "I barely know what I'm doing with my own business." "That's exactly why you'd be good at it. You understand struggle. You understand transformation. You're not selling theory. You're selling results." He leaned back in his chair. "Think about it. No pressure, but the opportunity's there if you want it." After the call, Maya sat in her office for a long time, just thinking. 5 years ago, she'd taken over a failing business and fought to keep it alive. A year ago, she'd been working 70-hour weeks and slowly destroying herself. 6 months ago, she'd gotten an investment and hired a consultant and learned to let go of control. Now she was building something bigger than survival, something that could help other people, train the next generation, transform the industry she'd spent her life in. It was terrifying. It was also exactly what she wanted. That weekend, Maya invited her father over for dinner at her apartment, the first time she'd cooked for anyone in years. Jake called on video during the meal, joining from Denver, and for an hour they were just a family again. No business talk, no stress, just 3 people who'd survived loss and hardship and learned to find joy in small moments. "You really okay?" Jake asked at one point, his face serious on the phone screen. "Yeah," Maya said, and realized she meant it completely. "I really am." After her father went home and Jake hung up, Maya stood at her kitchen window, looking out at Bloomfield. Lights were coming on in windows across the neighborhood. People were finishing their days, settling into their evenings, living the ordinary lives that she'd sacrificed for so long to keep a business alive. She thought about the generator in that warehouse, the one Harlow had jokingly challenged her to fix. She'd brought it back to life because that's what she did. She fixed broken things. But somewhere along the way, she'd learned a harder lesson. Some things you couldn't fix alone. Some things required help, required systems, required the courage to let other people share the load. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Talk to my contact at CCAC. They're interested in the training partnership. Coffee next week to discuss?" Maya smiled. "Absolutely. Tuesday morning work for you?" She set down her phone and looked around her apartment. It was still small, still cluttered with tools and boxes. But it felt different now, like a place where someone lived, not just a place where someone slept between work shifts. Tomorrow she'd go to the shop. She'd work with her team, train Sarah, consult with clients, build the business into something bigger and better. She'd keep learning to delegate, to trust, to let go of the need to control everything. Tomorrow, she'd start developing the training program proposal, working with Marcus and the community college to create something that could give other people the opportunities she'd had. Tomorrow, she'd keep growing. But tonight, she was just Maya Donovan, not Joseph's daughter, not a business owner fighting for survival, not the woman who had to fix everything alone. Just herself, standing in her small apartment in Pittsburgh, looking out at a city she loved, feeling for the first time in years like her life was truly her own. She'd fixed the generator in that warehouse because she knew that dead things weren't really dead. They were just waiting for someone who cared enough to bring them back to life. Turns out the same was true for people, for businesses, for dreams that had been abandoned because they seemed too difficult to maintain. She hadn't just saved her father's business, she'd saved herself. And in doing so, she'd learned the most important lesson of all. The best way to honor a legacy wasn't to preserve it unchanged, but to transform it into something that could survive, grow, and help others do the same. The city lights stretched out before her, each one a person living their own story, fighting their own battles, learning their own lessons. Maya was just one among millions, but her story mattered. Her transformation mattered. The business she was building mattered. And for the first time in her life, she believed that completely. Outside, Pittsburgh hummed with its constant industrial rhythm. Trains, traffic, the distant sound of machinery running through the night. The same sounds that had shaped her childhood, that had taught her to read machines by their voices, that had made her who she was. She closed her eyes and listened, and in those familiar sounds she heard something new. The rhythm of possibility, the hum of potential, the steady beat of a future she was finally ready to embrace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to grow. But tonight, Maya Donovan allowed herself something she hadn't allowed in years. She allowed herself to rest, and in that rest, in that moment of peace, she found what she'd been searching for all along. Not perfection, not control, not the burden of carrying everything alone, just herself, complete, enough, ready for whatever came next. The generator was running. The business was thriving. Her life was her own again. And that, Maya thought as she finally turned away from the window, was everything she'd ever really needed.